Always the latest news and views. You're listening to the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand.
I came across an article the other day, and I thought this is something worth following up on, especially when we consider how much time we have spent talking about things like social media and connecting and how important it is, and sadly how little of it or less of it we seem to be doing now than ever before. So here's the deal. Nicholas Epley is a professor of behavioral science at the University of Chicago, and he's the author of a book called A Little More Social: How Small Choices Create Unexpected Happiness, Health, and Connection. Mr. Epley, thank you for taking the time. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Let me begin by asking, how did you come? I mean, yes, you wrote the book on this. How did you come to write this book? What was it? Was there a particular incident, something that made you say, hey, you know what? Let's delve more into this. How did it happen?
So there was a moment about 15, 16 years ago, maybe. I was on the train going into Chicago, where I work at the University of Chicago. And I was sitting there on the train, and it just sort of hit me like a eureka moment that morning that we're all highly social creatures, made happier and healthier by connecting with each other. And yet here we all were sitting on that train car being completely silent with each other. I was writing a chapter from my first book at the time describing how social connection increases our well-being. And this just struck me as a real paradox. Why is it that highly social creatures like us are sitting here on the train day after day choosing not to connect with each other?
Okay, so it would seem to me that part of the problem is, or a part of the reality here is, we feel uneasy about socializing with people we don't know. So how do you get over that?
Yes, so that's exactly the issue. I have, for most of my career, studying what we might think of as mind reading, how we make inferences about each other's thoughts and beliefs and attitudes, and mostly how we screw that up and misunderstand each other. And one of the real barriers that we found to social connection is that we think, actually mistakenly, that other people won't respond favorably when we reach out to connect to them. So on my train ride that morning and subsequent experiments, for instance, we found that people thought that other riders on the train wouldn't be as interested in talking with them as the other riders actually were. And as a result, they underestimated how well those conversations would go. And that's a phenomenon we found over and over and over and over again, that we're generally overly pessimistic about how positively others respond when we try to connect with them. And the way you get over that is practice, actually. It's avoidance that creates misunderstanding and mistakes like this. Reaching out and trying is what calibrates your beliefs.
I'm sure some people listening to this will think, well, wait a sec, there are people who describe themselves as extroverts. They'll talk to anybody and everybody, and others who are introverts. But the research you've done basically says it doesn't matter. This can be good regardless of how you classify yourself.
So in terms of our experience, that's right. Introverts and extroverts, or at least those that score highly as introverts or extroverts on personality scales, don't actually experience social interaction as differently as they think they do. What introversion and extroversion really predicts are the choices that we make, the beliefs that we have about how other people might respond to us or what we might enjoy. But once people are actually engaging with others or connecting with others, it seems to be pretty good regardless of how extroverted or introverted you are. Extroversion and introversion really describes more about our habits and our beliefs about ourselves, not as much about our actual experiences.
Okay. The other thing I would bring up, I started our interview by talking about the fact that, so many of us, for whatever that reason is, many people will look back, to the pandemic and say that's when everything began to change because those social connections weren't happening anymore. We all text. Everybody texts. And I just wonder, for some people, that seems to be a much more comfortable way to contact somebody else, to have that conversation, than through human voice. Why is that not as good?
Well, it turns out it lacks a lot of the things that in social interaction that actually connects us with each other. So at least in conversation, what happens is we go back and forth. We're responsive to each other. We show interest in each other. And it's that stuff that happens in conversation, those dynamic processes that actually pull people together. Texting back and forth can establish connection. They can establish the start of, hey, maybe we could talk Friday night at 7 o'clock or something. But in terms of the actual experience, texting just doesn't feel nearly as good as actually having a live conversation with somebody. It's a little more like diet soda compared to regular soda in terms of its effect on your happiness.
Interesting. Okay. You're quoted in a story saying the other factors you're now describing with respect to texting is the difference just the human voice makes. What does that mean? How?
Yeah, so we find in our research that the voice carries a lot of the sound of connection, in conversation, at least, it clarifies what we're saying. So we misunderstand each other a lot more when we're typing to each other than when we're talking to each other. Our voice also communicates beyond just what we're thinking about. It also communicates that we are actually thinking or feeling. That is, it communicates that you have a thoughtful mind that is engaging in thinking and feeling right now. So we find, for instance, that people are judged to be more thoughtful, intelligent, and rational when you hear what they have to say than when you read what they have to say, even when it's identical words, even when the content is exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And we also find that the voice connects you better. You just feel more connected after talking with someone than after typing with someone.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noted as well, you said, you know what, there are things you can do with respect to when you're talking to someone, actually having the conversation. You know, there are feelings you can sort of get across. You can be, you know, enthusiastic, you can be sad. And I thought to myself, sure, that's what emojis are for.
They are, and they can do some work, but they pale by comparison to what our voice can actually do.
Okay, so let me ask one other thing here. And people hearing this are like, you know what? Well, wait a sec. Let's say I go ahead and take this advice, and maybe I'm on that bus ride or subway ride every day, and I want to follow your advice and strike up that conversation. Is there a good way to begin a conversation? Typically, how do you get into this for people who've not done it?
So there are lots of ways that you can begin conversation in ways that are quite effective. I think the most important, though, is not to think about the exact words you might use to engage with somebody, but rather to think about the mindset you take when you're out interacting with other people. We find, for instance, that when you just take more of an interest in other people, it tends to make the conversation go a little more easily because you are kind of spontaneously thinking of what to say next. But when in doubt, it never hurts to start a conversation with a compliment.
Oh. Now, see, as soon as you said that, I thought, well, what if it's a man and a woman in that way? Maybe a woman doesn't want to be talked to and have a compliment shared. Then what?
That could be true, but then the conversation stops. And that certainly happens. Look, our data don't suggest that every conversation turns out well or that you should be engaging with other people all the time. It suggests that we underestimate the odds that it will turn out well, and as a result are overly reluctant to reach out and engage with somebody else. Sometimes, you'll make mistakes. Conversation won't go well. The interaction won't be desired, but then you move on, right? Turns out, though, more often than we would think, reaching out to other people in kindness to try to engage with them tends to create reciprocity. In return, people tend to reach back to us more positively than we'd expect.
Do you still do this? Has this now become habit for you?
Oh, yeah. I have to say, nothing has changed the way I live my life more than this research. I'm a very different person now from what I used to be. I'm more open. I approach other people in kindness more often. I'm the kind of person that can talk to anybody, anywhere, about almost anything. And the conversations overwhelmingly turn out well. Wow. When I feel grateful, I don't keep it to myself. I share it, pass along lots of compliments.
And that's not how you were before, as you described it, right? This just came kind of all of a sudden.
Yeah, look, I'm a former college football player in the States, so maybe a little bit gruff, a little bit standoffish in some ways, very focused on getting things done, which would sometimes lead me to be maybe a little bit curt with people, a little bit short with people. It just makes you much friendlier. Once you realize the power that you have to lift other people up and to create connections over the course of your day that make your life and other people's better, at least I find it just makes you a friendlier person.
I want to wrap up, but I did want to ask you, going all the way back to the beginning, that conversation you first started, did it begin with, "Hi, how are you"? How did you begin it?
That very first, yeah. So that morning I was on the train, somebody sat down next to me that morning, and I thought, does this make sense? Is this what we ought to be doing? I decided to put myself in an experiment this morning. That's what got all of this rolling. And I turned to the woman next to me. She was maybe 15 to 20 years older than I was, wearing this fabulous red hat, which I'll never forget. And I worked at my courage a little bit. My brain was telling me I shouldn't be doing this. She probably doesn't want to talk to you. She'll probably think you're a creep. But I went ahead anyway, and I said, "Hi, my name is Nick." Which turned out to be the most powerful words you have for starting a conversation. "I love your hat. I have one just like it," is what I said.
You really said that?
Which is not going to win any awards for the best way to start a conversation, but, it got the ball rolling, and off we went more easily than I would have guessed.
So last question, because I'm assuming you do this ride on a pretty regular basis. Have you, now that you talk to people, have you made friends, any lasting sort of relationships here?
Yeah, so lots. I mean, where people live, what the context of their lives are going to dictate, how routinely you see other people that you could connect with and so on. But at least for me, I ride in on the train into Chicago every day, 5 days a week, and I've made tons of friends on the train. In fact, I keep a note on my phone. When I meet somebody new, I will jot down their name on my phone. I have an on the train notes page. Wow. So that I can go back when I talk with them again and use their name, because that's what friends do with each other.
What a great idea. Love the story. Thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
An iHeartRadio experience. Jelly Roll, live in Quebec City at Festival d'été de Québec. Presented by Bell in collaboration with Coors Light. You ain't nothing but a liar. You could win VIP tickets for 2 for July 19th with flights, hotel, and $1,000 cash. I'm wide awake and I'm dreaming. Download iHeartRadio. Listen to CJAD 800 for 10 minutes and enter to win. Jelly Roll at FEQ. Every day you listen is another chance to win. Hear it live. Weekdays from 2 until 6. Or hear it now. You're listening to the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand.
All right, it's time for us to check in with Dr. Joe Schwarcz, host of the Dr. Joe Show, which airs here on CJAD Sundays at 3. He is also course director of the McGill Office for Science and Society. So, Joe, I sent this to you. I will point out, I'm going to play a little bit of it now. This is one of several, basically all on the same subject, that I came across in my social media feed this week. Take a listen to this.
It has now been confirmed that America's #1 strawberry brand is directly tied to cancer. Driscoll's, which controls 1/3 of all U.S. strawberries, gets sprayed with up to 371 chemical pesticides before it ever reaches your family's table.
Okay, thank you. That goes on and on, by the way, for a while. I was just, in hearing it now, I'm trying to think, why do they play that song in the background about you? But anyway, Joe, please, I sent this to you. Weigh in, because I keep seeing this now, different messages all the time. When did strawberries become public enemy #1?
Aaron, many times a day I get questions about, is it true that? And they quote some Instagram or TikTok post. The answer invariably is no, because there's just so much nonsense out there, and this is the epitome of that. First of all, to suggest that there have been 371 pesticide detected on strawberries is absolute nonsense. But I know where that number comes from, because researchers test for numerous pesticides on all kinds of produce to see if there's any residue. It doesn't mean that they all are found, but those are the number that can be tested for. The fact is that on strawberries, there are maybe 10 to 12 pesticide residues that are found. But the number of pesticide residues is irrelevant. What matters is how much is found, because pesticides are very carefully regulated in the U.S. by FDA, here by Health Canada, and there are stringent requirements about how pesticides can be used and how much residue can be left. Now, because of the fantastic analytical chemical capabilities that we now have, and I constantly, accuse my analytical chemist colleagues about this, that they're the real problem, because now they're devising ways to find substances down to parts per trillion, which is the width of one credit card compared to the distance between the Earth and the Moon. But just because you find it doesn't mean that it's doing anything. It just means that we have unbelievable capabilities. So no pesticide residues on strawberries are detected at any levels that are above what Health Canada or FDA deems to be safe. And the tests that are done in terms of deeming it to be safe are very, very extensive. Animal feeding studies in increasing large doses until some effect is seen. That is called the no observed adverse effect level. And it is cut back to about 1,000-fold in order to tell us what the acceptable daily intake for humans is. So, to suggest that just because something has been found on strawberry, that it means that you're going to be at risk for cancer for eating strawberries is absolute nonsense. Furthermore, some of the things that they say in that video, which I did look at, that strawberries are bleached. Absolutely not true. It's a lie. Strawberries are not bleached. Now, I will agree that the strawberries that you very often find now are not very tasty. And that's because they have been bred to look very large and be nice and red. But unfortunately, that breeding mostly means that they contain a lot of moisture. And so the taste is not great, but it has nothing at all to do with safety. So this is really just fear-mongering and based upon absolute nonsense. But, you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of these kind of scary videos out there which are not based on any kind of legitimate science whatsoever. So I don't know what is really the motivation.
Well, that's my question, Joe. Typically, if you're going to do something like this, you're trying to push something. I don't know, sell a product, sell a supplement. There's nothing here. This is just taking it out on the on this one particular company, by the way, Driscoll. With zero proof. I'm trying to understand what's the payoff here. Why?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, often they will be selling a book, you know, or some washing liquid that you should use to, you know, but sometimes people just do it for the benefit of getting attention, you know, the more attention they get on their post, the greater the chance that they're going to be rewarded financially. Because, you know, if you get enough views on a post, you make some money. So I think that's the motivation. But I think these people should be tarred and feathered because they are creating anxieties where there's no need for them. There are enough things in our life to worry about and to have anxieties about. But strawberries are not one of them.
All right. So that's okay. You can go ahead and eat your strawberries, everybody. It's safe. You're not going to die. They're fine. And according to Joe, you should try to buy the smaller ones because I should have known this. They taste better than the ones that are plumped up.
Generally,
right?
the hothouse strawberries taste better.
Okay. Now, you also wanted to provide an update on artificial sweeteners. What's this about?
Right. There's constant stories emerging about artificial sweeteners. And because today we have, debates in virtually every country about a sugar tax, on putting a tax on foods like soft drinks and desserts that contain a lot of sugar, because we know the detrimental effects of sugar. However, because people are now cutting back on sugar and companies are putting less in there in order to circumvent the tax laws, they're using more and more artificial sweeteners. Now, these are substances that mostly are non-caloric. That is, things like aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, acesulfame, potassium don't provide any calories, but they do provide some sweetness. And these have been controversial right from the onset. I mean, saccharin, which is now over 100 years old, the safety of it was debated from the moment that it was introduced. Because any time some new technology is introduced, there will be debates about it. People will, worry. We've seen this with cell phones, microwave ovens, all kinds of things. It doesn't mean that there are not some legitimate concerns. There are some about artificial sweeteners. Not that aspartame causes cancer. That's nonsense. But the current worries are that these artificial sweeteners can imbalance our microbiome. And those are the bacteria that live in our gut. And there are trillions of them. We have as many bacterial cells in our body as we have human cells. And we used to think that those bacteria in our gut are just sort of innocent bystanders looking on. We now know that they actually take a very active part in our physiology. They exchange chemicals with our blood. And some of these are very important in terms of boosting the immune system. And some of these sweeteners have been shown to interfere with the microbiome and make it less diverse, which is not a good thing. That doesn't mean that it causes cancer or anything like that. But it may mean that it may have an effect on our physiology, on our immune system. So this is something that we have to be aware of. But it is also important to understand that these artificial sweeteners have not solved the problem that they were designed to solve. The problem they were designed to solve was to make people lose weight. And that just has not happened. Ever since their introduction, we have seen obesity just blossom. Now, exactly why that is not really known. It may be something to do with the disturbing the microbiome that has an effect on weight gain, or it may be that these things just increase our taste for sweets. And while they increase our taste for sweets, they don't satisfy the physiological needs because there are no calories coming in together with the sweet taste, as we have been accustomed to with sugar. So people have the sweet taste and they still crave to eat other things because they're still hungry. So because they have not really satisfied, what we wanted them to do, I think we have to look at them with a wary eye, especially given the microbiome issue. So for me, I think we just don't need them. We don't need to drink artificially sweetened or sugar-sweetened soft drinks. If you like bubbles, you can just drink, soda water. And I think we should just generally cut down on all sugary substances and other sweets too, even if they are artificially sweetened. So
I can't take solace in the fact that I'm not drinking Coke, but Diet Coke, and I should try to cut that out too.
Yeah, I think so. Now, I'm not going to suggest that there's, disease around the corner.
No, but it's not good for you. Okay.
I think we can take that for granted, that it's not good for you. Whether it's bad for you is debatable,
sure,
but it certainly is not going to be good for you. If you want to go for an artificial sweetener, I think, or a non-caloric sweetener, I think stevia is probably the best bet, because at least that has not been shown to disturb the microbiome.
Can I drink Olipop? You familiar with Olipop?
Yes. What is the sweetener in it?
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
I'm going to look it up. Next time we chat, I'll let you know what it is. You can tell me if I can drink it or not, because it's my favorite.
Okay. Very good.
Fair enough. Basically, moderation is still the key.
It's the sounds of your city. The Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand.
Come across this story at a time we're heading into the busy holiday travel season, right? And then to find out that we are facing an air traffic controller shortage in this country. As I said, I was expecting this might come out of the U.S. We know that's been a recurring issue there. And the more I read about this, the more I see it's not only there. Obviously, it's not only here either. It's happening in a lot of places. So I thought we'd try to find out more, because it turns out that when you're 200 people short and you're heading into the busy season of all, that probably is a concern. Dennis Wyche is a former air traffic controller. He's been in the business, or was, for 35 years. Mr. Wyche, thanks so much for coming on. Look, when you see this story, you see a headline like this, are you concerned?
A little concerned. We've been short for as long as I've been an air traffic controller. 35 years. I was hired. We were short, and we still are.
So I don't know if it's fair to ask what brings this on. If it's been going on forever, it's not anything new that's happening. Why does this happen?
Why do shortages happen?
Yeah, on a regular basis in this industry.
It's very hard to train air traffic controllers. It's very hard to select air traffic controllers. The whole process of qualifying an air traffic controller, from getting in the door to a qualified controller, takes a very long time. The passing grade is very high, and it's very hard to also select a person who we don't know can be an air traffic controller to be an air traffic controller. So if you pick someone off the street and say, I think you'll be a good air traffic controller, there's very, very few, there's no good test to say you will be an air traffic controller when we're done training you.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about what it takes. So you mentioned I think I also read it's a very long process, right? I can decide today I want to, go ahead and become an air traffic controller. What's involved and how long would it take?
So, it's a long process just to get selected for the training. You have to go through passing an aptitude test, which is the last I knew was called a FEAST test, which is a European Air Traffic Services test, and that's basically a test of whether you can visualize. And then once you pass that within the top 5%, 3%, whatever it takes to get an interview, you get an interview. You pass the interview, and then you go to a second interview, and then you may or may not be selected for air traffic control training. at that point, they divide you into two streams of what's called instrument control or visual control, which would send you into an air traffic control tower, or instrument control, IFR, would send you to an air traffic control center, which we would call a surveillance controller or radar controller. And at that point, then you start your training. And the basic training, 3-4 months of theory, and you have to pass every exam you take with 80%. And if you fail, you're out. And then once you pass your theory, then you go into simulation training as part of it. Sort of transitions into simulation training, and then you're going to go to on-the-job training, all of which can take 2 years, 2.5 years.
Wow. I just as you said that, I thought to myself, if you fail that first part, the theory part, you said you're out. You don't get a second chance here? You're just done?
Well, no, you can fail an exam. You get to rewrite, but you're not going to get 3 rewrites on the same exam.
Okay.
So, you fail that exam. But the problem is that you're writing an exam, and then you have to rewrite an exam, and you also have another exam coming up. So you've got to somehow manage to pass both exams. If you get behind the curve, you're going to be in trouble. University is also very hard, but this was the hardest training that I ever did because of the learning curve.
What made you decide to do this? I mean, were you just a big airplane kind of guy? I mean, you love planes. Why did you decide to become this?
Oh, absolutely. I was in the 1980s. I was got my pilot's license to the air cadets, my glider pilots, my private pilots, and I wanted to go in the Air Force. And then I got a prescription for glasses and couldn't go in the Air Force, and didn't have the money to train myself to be a pilot. And I was in CJAD, and I saw a sign, become an air traffic controller. And I was like, I'll give that a try. So I did, and I was successful at the time. It was 24 people were accepted onto the first course out of, I don't know how many thousands of candidates. And that was the beginning of a wave of training in 1990, after they hadn't been hiring for 8 years during the 1980s cutbacks. And now I'm the beginning of a wave of retirements. So as I'm beginning that wave of retirements 35 years in, that's going to continue to occur. So while the company is trying to replace bodies that are going away by attrition, we also have the retirement. We also have natural reasons people may leave a job in any job along the way. So they got to replace a lot of people.
Are you concerned? I mean, when we see and people hear this and think, we know how there have been some incidents. Of course, there always are. But I'm just saying, with respect to not having enough traffic controllers, does that affect the safety issue?
I wouldn't think they would give up on safety before they would give up on the amount of airplanes in the sky. So what that means is that the humans, the air traffic controllers in the system, are always going to operate in a safe manner. But at some point, they're going to say, the system, the company, the managers, the controllers are going to say, we can't control as many airplanes safely as we normally do, and then they cut back. And that's when it hits the news. That's when the news goes, whoa, wait a minute, there's delays. And it hits the news, and that's when suddenly people start to notice. But we've been short for ever since I was working as an air traffic controller. We've been short staff. It just never really hit the news before.
It's interesting, though, because, you kind of tend to think if there's going to be a shortage and it's this hard to apply and we're not hiring people fast enough, is it because you think there's just not as much interest as there was perhaps when you got into this?
No, I don't think so. I think there is interest. There was also a pandemic that hit in about, you know when it hit, 2020.
Yep.
And we had more controllers in training in the system than ever before when the pandemic hit, because we knew that within years we were going to be short-staffed. And that pandemic hit the company in a big way because we're not government in Canada. Air traffic control is a private company, not for profit. But even though you're not for profit, you need money, and the money comes from the airlines, and the airlines weren't flying. So there was a huge let go of people in training during the pandemic, and it was very hard to reattract them to the career afterwards because they were like, they went and found other jobs. And so where they had more trainees than ever in the system at that time, they lost a significant portion, never got some of them back, and now they're hiring as much as they can again. But like I said, it takes a long time to train them, and they're already behind the curve because they're losing people to retirement at this point. And they're always losing people to retirement, but the numbers are down.
Right.
And the more the numbers are down, the harder it is to train because to train somebody, they need to be working in a position with a lot of airplanes. And if you have 3 trainees in a specialty, for example, and each trainee wants to work the busy position, they can't all work that position at the same time. It can only be occupied by one person, you know what I mean? So it's hard to train as many people as you need to train in a short period of time.
Just as we wrap up, I'm curious too, if someone is listening to this and thinking, wow, this is something I'd like to do, who bears the cost of the training here, by the way?
It is NAV Canada that pays the cost of the training.
So you, as the person training, you're not out of pocket anything here?
No,
Okay.
I'm not speaking for today. I haven't checked in the last 3 months, but it has swung back and forth over time. Mm-hmm. But the last most recent I knew is that the company pays the cost of the training, and they also pay some salary while you're training. Okay.
Oh, okay. And by the way, in case people are interested in this, as you mentioned, it's a fairly lengthy training process. You can imagine you're tied up in this for what, 2 years at least?
I would say you should, if you're thinking of getting into it, you would plan to spend 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. Listen, I very much appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good day.
Oh, wait a second. Just before I let you go,
yeah.
For people saying, well, how do I apply? So you mentioned NAV Canada are the only people doing this, right? That's where you train.
In Canada, there's a couple of other places, companies that do it, but mostly it's NAV Canada in Canada, and you apply at navcanada.ca.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Mr. Wyche. Appreciate it.
iHeartRadio is throwing it back.
2010s, the decade.
To the days of huge hits and unforgettable anthems. A non-stop stream of the biggest and best.
Drake, Rihanna, Beyonce, Katy, Gaga, The Weeknd,
and more. All your decade-defining favorites, all in one place.
Hi, it's Katy Perry.
Hey, it's Bruno Mars.
This is Kesha.
Find 2010's The Decade on the free iHeartRadio app. Preset the station so it's always one tap away. Staying up to date on your schedule. This is the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand.
So we learned earlier this afternoon, very, very sad news. Hockey fans in the city will remember him. Claude Lemieux, Canadian who was, by the way, on the 1986 Stanley Cup winning team. He'd won 3 Stanley Cups in his career with a couple of teams, including the New Jersey Devils. But he had been, the Canadians now have this presentation that they make every day in the playoffs. They have a former Canadians, usually a captain, I guess, coming out. They call him the torchbearer. So I think Kirk Muller's been out there. Yaroslav Halak was out there last night. Larry Robinson had done this. And then Claude Lemieux, again, a Stanley Cup winner in 1986 with the Canadians, was out there a couple of days ago. Looked fine. He was out there, held up the torch. And then we found out today, tragically, that Claude Lemieux had died at the age of 60. Now, I don't have many details to this. We did get, and again, if you're a hockey fan here, you'll remember Claude Lemieux. We're going to talk to Enrico Ciccone about this as well, because I heard a great quote. He said, everybody hated him, but everybody wanted him on their team, which I thought was such a great way to describe Claude Lemieux, such a great, talented player. But I had, earlier in the day, Sean Campbell from TSN came into the studio, and, well, we talked about it. It kind of started like this. Don't really know where to start other than 3 days ago. We saw Claude Lemieux bring out the torch at the Canadiens game against Carolina. He looked, you always be careful when you say that, he looked fine. And today we find out he died. He's 60, was 60. What more do we know about this, Sean?
Not much at all. It was about an hour ago, less than an hour ago, we were live on the air and the news breaks from the NHL alumni, and then you're a little bit lost for words because you have a vivid memory of them turning to Claude Lemieux carrying the torch, and this has been such an iconic moment. Who will carry the torch? Yeah. Who is going to be doing it? And then I think about just 2 days ago when I saw that, I was flooded with memories of Claude Lemieux, the playoff performer, and how is that going to translate to the Montreal Canadiens winning this game in overtime? And his legacy is what he did in the playoffs.
For people who don't remember, don't have that vivid memory you do, just kind of a quick background. He was with the Canadiens for 3 Stanley Cups?
He had 4 Stanley Cups, but he had, with the 86 Stanley Cup. He was with the club. He won with New Jersey and Colorado as well, later on in his career. But wherever he went on to win, and so much so that he won a Conn Smythe. This is a guy that would pick up, never the top scorer on his team, but twice in the NHL, he led the NHL in goal scoring, game-winning goals, overtime goals. But to flash to the Montreal Canadiens, it was the 86 run where he had 2 of his 3 career playoff overtime winners, including Game 7 against the Hartford Whalers in round 1. And I did a lot of radio with Chris Nyland. And Chris Nyland, who has his one Stanley Cup ring from 86, he goes, I would never have a Stanley Cup ring if it wasn't for Claude Lemieux, who won round 1 in Game 7 against the Hartford Whalers. He said that moment was the moment that we started to believe in a group. And he was a young rookie, and there were a lot of youngsters. That was part of the transition years for the Canadians from those dynasty of the 70s to the early 80s. And then you had Lemieux and coming in, and Claude Lemieux was this guy that just did not give about anything.
I remember as a bit of a tough guy. You talk about him as a goal scorer, but I remember him being,
tough. Like, yes, he was tough, but he was the equivalent of the pest, the antagonizer. Yeah. He would do anything to win a hockey game, and that is part of his memory that he left. And when you had a regular season performer, and you talk about playoff performers, all-time playoff performers, you can go down the list of your Wayne Gretzky's, your Mario Lemieux's. You will say Claude Lemieux's name.
That is, as I said from earlier this afternoon, Sean Campbell from TSN 690. Enrico Ciccone did not play with Claude Lemieux, but certainly knew of him, and he's on the line. He's, of course, a Quebec Liberal MNA. Enrico, thank you so much for coming on. I heard you clipped earlier in the afternoon, and I thought what you said was so, perfectly describing the kind of a player Claude Lemieux was. You said everyone hated him, but everybody wanted him on their team.
Well, you know what? It was a great explanation. We guys had the discussion that he was in the words in the NHL we call him money player. He's the guy that would come and he would perform. He was one of for me, in my era, he was probably the best competitor that a team could have. He would show up. He would score big goals. He would hit you. He wasn't that type of the fighting guy. He wouldn't let his gloves down, but he could get you off your game with the words. He was so witty. He could come back and with a phrase that would get you off your game. And he was the prototype of a playoff player. And everybody wanted a player like that.
It's interesting to hear you say that, right? We think of players, you look at a career and how many goals you scored, et cetera. But as you just said, it turns out in playoffs, he was your money guy in the playoffs, right? Talk about how many game-winning goals he had in playoffs, including for the Canadians back in 1986. And I think Sean made the point, Game 7 against the Hartford Whalers, if not for that, they don't win the Cup that year. He scored the winning goal.
Exactly. And not only that, but he was the type of player, there's two ways to win a game in the NHL. You can play a perfect game, which happens very, very rarely, or you can make the opponent beat themselves. And sometimes, Claude would do that. He would make the team, get off their game, and try things, and he would get guys running after him, so they would forget about the game plan, and that's the type of player he was. And there's the thing is too with Claude is that, and that's what I love about the NHL. Little stories that. We can always call each other. And 2 months ago, Claude called me, because of his son he was caught in the Middle East when there was a lot of bombings in Iran, and he called me, very worried. He goes, Chico, can you help me? Can you get my son back? And of course, as a provincial MNA, you have contacts. So I contacted the federal side, and we went back and forth, and we would work a lot with a lot of people. We got him back, So, I was talking to him about 2 months ago, talked to his brother today, Justin, and he was so hurt. He was so hurt, and I offered him my support, and he said, Chico, we'll need support. So if I have a message for the people of Quebec, the Lemieux family will need support for the next few weeks.
I will point out for anybody, if you want to go on social media, there's some tributes already up there, and I'm sure if you go and the family will see those and you can pay your respects that way. I mentioned, Enrico, he'd been on the ice, of course, as an ambassador with the Torch. Did you have any sense, I'm sure you've been watching all the games, any sense that anything was up?
No, you know what? These are the things that, there's a lot of rumors, I will let the team, I would let the family speak whenever they want to speak and explain what happened. But, hockey's a tough game, and we get hit a lot. We get a lot of concussions. There's a lot of problems. I don't want to speculate or anything, but there's, not because you've made a lot of money, not because you've had a great career, that after your career you don't feel pain, mentally. You don't feel pain physically. I know when I get up every morning, I feel it. And it's not, there's a lot of players that live through a lot of pain, and that's that's something that we go with. You know, I don't want to get pity from anybody, but these are the things that we go through, and maybe like I said, I don't want to speculate about something might have happened with Claude, and it's too bad. It's very too bad, because when you see things like that with a great wife, great family, and surrounding friends, the Montreal Canadiens family, which is very supportive when you have problems. It's very unfortunate that things like that can happen.
Had a wife, 4 children as well. You mentioned, of course, helping out with his son. So listen, our hearts obviously go out to them today. And I said, if you want to pay your respects, you can do it by going online. There's so many posts have already come up acknowledging him and the amazing career that he had. Enrico, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thanks for giving me the chance to talk about a great NHL player.
Take good care. Enrico Ciccone, former Montreal Canadiens player, now, of course, Quebec Liberal MNA for Marquette.
Listen live to Montreal Now with Aaron Rand. Weekdays from 2 until 6. Miss something? Find on-demand highlights at CJAD800.com or on the free iHeartRadio app.
I'm Luke Wilson. Join me each week for Film Never Lies. Since retiring from the NFL, I've had a lot on my mind, and now I've got my own show. So if you're tired of lazy takes, if you want honest conversations, join us each week. Film Never Lies, available on all TSN platforms and the iHeartRadio app.